So, Andrew Wilson from The Crucible recently debated Miss Kenzie from TikTok, a known feminist and Marxist, on a wide range of topics from abortion to women's rights to Marxism and a lot of other things. But today, we're just going to focus on one topic, which is, do men have the monopoly on force? I'll let Andrew take it away.
But the problem when it comes down to enforcement is that women can't do enforcement.
What do you mean?
So I'll give you the easy hypothetical.
Okay.
If all men tomorrow decide that women in the United States are slaves, are women in the United States slaves?
No.
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 Why wouldn't they be?
I think it would be
How could women stop it?
I mean, it would just depend essentially on like access to resources.
Yeah, men have the access to all the resources because they made you slaves.
Well, that's how women could stop it.
Women couldn't
It would
stop
just be a fight over resources.
How come women can't stop it in Islamic nations then when they just go, okay, you're all slaves?
Obviously, in Islamic nations, they don't have access to specific resources.
Nobody has access to resources if men don't allow access to those resources. Nobody. Because men have a monopoly on force. That's feminist theory. Feminists understand, even Marxist feminists know this, that men have a monopoly on force. So, in other words, if men collectively...
Under patriarchy, I agree.
No, under any archy, they're going to need to have men as their monopoly on force. I'll give you an example. If tomorrow men decided to enslave all women would be enslaved. However, if tomorrow all women decided to enslave all men, they do not have the force doctrine and requisite necessary to do so. They
Okay.
could not do it. They just couldn't do it physically.
Within any context.
No.
So if women had access to all the drones, if
Nope.
women had access to all the water supply,
repairs them
if
all?
women had access,
We
if
repair
women
them
had
all.
access to, I mean, women can have the capacity to repair. I don't understand,
Okay, so here's what I would say. Let's do this experiment this way. If women had access to all of the firearms on Earth that exist, okay, and every weapon which exists, and they have access to all of that, they still don't have the requisite brute force that would be necessary to keep men under control. They just wouldn't. It wouldn't be possible to do long term.
what do you mean
Even
by
short term.
what do you mean by brute force? That they just
Men
wouldn't be
are-
able to pull the trigger?
No, that men are much, much, much stronger, and that
Sure.
guns are only an equalizer until men take your guns.
Right, and obviously they would have to get close enough. But I mean,
They
I don't
can.
care how strong you are if you don't have water and food. What
Well,
are
it's
you gonna
really
do?
simple then. Do you think that if you were the head of a prison, would you rather have all male or all female guards? If you were dealing with dangerous prisoners, even if both had access to guns.
I mean, I guess it would depend what the goal is. I
To
think
keep the
women,
prisoners who are dangerous under control.
I mean, I think women can make really great police officers because they are less likely to use excessive force. They're more likely to de-escalate, where men are more likely to escalate.
More likely to get disarmed, more likely to get beaten up, more likely to accidentally shoot a suspect. They're more likely to do all sorts of things to the contrary as well. But there's also way fewer females who are in the police force because they can't meet the minimum requirements, which are necessary to be a cop. They can't meet the necessary minimum physical requirements. Same thing in the military. They
Well,
can't meet the
okay.
necessary minimum physical requirements to be in the infantry.
Okay.
Most women can't do it.
Right.
So men have a monopoly on force, and because of force doctrine, this ends up coming down to this idea. If it is the case, you say that women can do anything that men can do, I counter this by saying they cannot. They cannot do enforcement. This is uniquely a male thing. There are some women who can be introduced who can meet these standards, but on average they can't.
Well, I think if we're to kind of bring it to an analogy, if the fence is 6 feet tall and most women are 5'8", then yeah, of course they're not going to be able to meet that standard. So is the standard just specific to certain male criteria that?
Well, it would be the criteria of you need to handle a male.
In order to be able to have force, you have to be able to handle a male. And the vast majority of women cannot physically handle a man. They just can't do it. Men are, on average, 40 to 70% stronger than women in the upper and lower body. They also have denser bones. They're also far more aggressive than women are on average. Another problem with Kinsey's argument is she skirts the line of an appeal to possibility fallacy by claiming that women can have the capacity to do things like fix drones, but by and large, women do not choose to do those things. You look at the STEM fields in particular, things like engineering, women make up a very small portion of the engineering field, something like 20 to 10%, depending on which field you look at. So by and large, women are choosing not to do these things, and men are typically choosing to do those things because they're more psychologically geared towards those things, and men are also typically better at those fields. So while yes, women do technically have the capability of doing things like repairing drones or being fit enough to be in the military or the police force, they are not typically psychologically geared to do these things, while men are. And when they do enter those fields, they are typically not as good as the men in those fields. And again, if you're going to try and control men, you're going to have to be able to do these types of things better than the men can. And because women very obviously cannot do force as well as men can, women will always have to use men to enforce anything that they would like to put into place, which is inherently contradictory to women actually being able to control men, as Andrew goes on to explain.
Men are, and women are, women will depend on men for the use of force, period. That's my claim, regardless of where they are. So it doesn't matter if you have a queen. And it doesn't even matter if you put women
I think if you
as the CEOs of everything.
Are we assuming that like just authority in general is force?
No. Authority in general isn't force, but in order to have rights or laws or governance of any kind requires force.
I mean, I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, so that's going to require men. So women are dependent upon men for force, period. So I think that
under a system of law, sure.
Under any system of governance. There's no system of governance in which women are not dependent on men for force. None.
You don't think that can be replaced with technology?
Nope. How? Men can destroy the technology. That's what force doctrine is.
Men maybe in groups too, but can I say that about women?
No, because you're still going to have to compete with a male group. So your only options here are either this. Like, let's even say you reduce the male population down to 5%. You're just like, yay, it's all women now, and it's 5% men or something like this. You still would have a hard time controlling them. We know this because there have been war-torn nations where like 80% of the men have died, and they're still in charge because of that monopoly on force. It's not because women don't have access to guns. They have access to guns, but they're less good with them. Guns require physical strength. Technology requires physical strength. Like tanks, it requires physical strength to load one.
Okay.
And Andrew makes another extremely good point here, which is that because men have the monopoly on force, men will always be required in order for any society to have any resemblance of a rule of law, because force will always be required in order to enforce rights and to punish those who violate those rights. Andrew is also right to point out here that authority and force are not the same thing. While authority does derive from force, they are not the same thing. Authority is backed up by force and can be changed by force. All of this culminates in Andrew's final hypothetical, which takes the men monopoly on force to its furthest extreme.
If the men in the United States wanted to overthrow the rightfully elected government of the United States, they could. Women could not.
Like citizens?
Yeah. And the only thing that would defend...
I don't know about that.
The only thing that could defend the United States from that would be men again. So it would be men on the defense and men on the offense, but women have never historically overthrown any government with violence ever once.
Again, like, do you think that I don't think men, citizens, could overthrow the United States government.
Maybe
just
not.
Because of,
but that's because men would be there with guns to stop them.
Well, I think that's because of, again, like tools.
Yeah, sure. But what I'm saying is
I mean, do you think if women had all the nukes that we wouldn't win?
No, you wouldn't win.
Why?
Well, who would you nuke? Yourself?
No, the men.
Where?
In your hypothetical.
Yeah, where are you going to nuke the men at that you don't have to go, right? So men are everywhere. So the thing is that women are everywhere too.
Everywhere.
I agree, but
Okay.
men have the ability to enslave women, and women don't have the ability to enslave men. Men have the ability to take themselves out of any governmental situation they want via force, and women don't have that. They never have had that. They've never been able to do it once. There's never been a violent government overthrow done by women, ever.
Okay.
Not even once. Because there's men. That's the problem, right? They'd have to face off with men, and only men can uniquely do that. So men are always in a position of patriarchy because you have to appeal to them for authority.
Now, none of this is meant to be saying what men ought to do. Men ought not to use force to get their way. It's not a stable way for society to function and operate. But the entire point of Andrew's argument is that if stretched to its furthest limits, men do have the monopoly on force and will always be able to get their way unless other men intercede on women's behalf. And based on every historical precedent set throughout time immemorial, he's completely right. But I'm just some white guy. What do I know? Hey guys, I hope you liked the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you didn't like it or disagree with some of the content, make sure to let me know in the comments about what I got wrong. I'm just some white guy. Hope to see you in the next video.